Hello everyone and welcome to the Bearded Fool Gaming. Today we're finally finishing our Aether Revolt spoiler discussion series here. I do apologize for the delay. I got distracted actually playing Magic over the weekend there and didn't get to it on the actual 5th day. But this has given us more time to kind of see what the set has to offer and get that in our minds and souls. So now, a couple of these cards I've only skimmed over, so these are going to be true first impressions. As always, mostly a limited perspective focusing on sealed and draft, and other formats on the occasion. So again, let's quit the jammering and jump right in. So the first card we have today is Midnight Entourage. This is a creature, a 3/3 creature for 2 and 2 black, and this is the Aetherborn Lord. I actually wasn't expecting one of these, so this is a nice little addition to the set. So now as it is, he's a 3/3 for 4 that gives your other Aetherborn +1/+1, and whenever it or another Aetherborn dies, then you draw a card and lose a life, so it has that little black draw card ability that you see so often. So now in Limited, I can see this being pretty decent. It's not a super bomb rare that you really want to open, but if you're stuck with it, you know it's going to be a decent option. And if you do happen to have a few other Aetherborns, he could actually be pretty decent. The ability to replace himself when he dies is what makes him kind of decent. And a 3/3 body is somewhat relevant, but a little undersized for a 4-drop. Like I said, if you have a lot of Aetherborn, then he's definitely going to be better because you'll actually be able to replace each of them, and that's pretty relevant. The life loss is also something to keep in mind, so that's why he's not a great card, but I think he's overall solid, and it'll be cool to see if there's some like budget, you know, casual deck or something that actually comes out and uses him in an Aetherborn tribal. I don't know if there's going to be enough Aetherborn for that, but I'm glad they made this card, and that's a shout out to Wizards for being smart on this regard. So the next card we have is Aether Stream Leopard. This is a common 2/3 for 3 with trample, and whenever it enters you get an energy, and whenever it attacks you can pay an energy to give it +2/+0. So this is the long lost second cousin to Mr. Tiger. I think it was a Tiger from Kaladesh. You know, he was a 6-drop 4/4 that gained +2. And this one is a smaller one at a 2/3 with trample. And I think this one's honestly probably a better card. You're essentially getting a 4/3 trample for 3 on the offense, which is pretty awesome. 3 does trade with a lot in this set, so I don't think it's a great defensive card. But if you're on the offensive energy deck, I think this is a great curve filler. And I don't really have any complaints. There are probably better cards out there, but this one just fits, and it'll be used, you know, when it's applicable. Next up, we have Aerial Modification. So we have Siege Modification we looked at the other day, and now we have the Aerial one, and this one's not quite as good. So this is another aura that can enchant a creature or vehicle. If it's on a creature, it gives it +2/+2 in flying, and if it's on a vehicle, it gives it that plus, making it constantly a creature. So now this allows essentially for 5 mana to get a really strong evasive creature, and that is good, but it's 5 mana and requires something else to be relevant. It can get you 2 for 1 where it's an aura, and unfortunately it's just a little too high costed for what it does. I understand why it's a high cost, because if it wasn't, you know, making you know, your 1-drop 7/11 vehicle into a 9, you know, 13 flyer on turn 3 or something would have been way too strong. This will probably see a little bit of play, but I don't think it's really worth anything. Absolutely no constructive playability, and that's unfortunate. But auras are kind of fragile as is, and this one is no exception. Next up, we have Highspire Infusion. So now this is an instant for 1 of the green, and this is the giant growth of the set. You get a 3/3 and 2 energy. It's always good to see little combat tricks. Now, I don't think these are as good as the combat trick that any of the combat tricks that we saw in Kaladesh, You know, with the white one giving indestructible and the red one giving trample and stuff like that. But, you know, if you do need that combat trick in your deck, and if you're in an energy deck, this can have a use because it is one of the few ways to get instant speed energy. So that's kind of cool. But overall, I'm not super impressed with it. It's a decent card and will feel its curve in certain decks. Next up, we have Lifecraft Awakening. So now this is an instant also. For X and a green, you put X +1 counters on an artifact. If it isn't a creature or vehicle, it becomes a 0/0 creature. So this is kind of a weird card because you can't use it to turn your creature or your vehicles into vehicle creatures, so that's kind of weird. But it essentially turns any of your other artifacts into a potentially massive creature. I'm not sure how I feel about this card. Again, it's one of those cards that requires you to have another artifact out there. Now, it is good to have a big mana sink to make a potentially huge creature. You know, 5 or 6 mana, you know, you've got a very relevant creature out there. And there may be some cool artifacts that you could put it on to give it some interesting mechanics and abilities like that. And considering its instant speed, this can make a blocker, you know, out of nothing. And so for that reason, I think that's why it puts it a little higher. I'm not super impressed with it, but this is a pretty cool combat trick. I would say this one is better than some of the ones we saw in Kaladesh just because of all the implications it can have. If you have an artifact deck that's using green, this is definitely going to be something that you want to include. Next up, we have Airdrop Air Knot. So this is a 4/3/4/5 with flying, and its revolt trigger is that you gain 5 life. So a 4/3 flying is obviously good. A 5-drop slot isn't too bad. You know, we have what was it? 2/5, 3/5, something like that in Kaladesh, I think, in flying for 5. Can't remember the exact numbers on it, but this is a very solid card. It's a semi-aggressive card, and the ability to gain that 5 life is pretty relevant. You know, this is similar to our Arborback Walker, whatever it was from Kaladesh, where it gains 5 life for a 5-drop, and that card is pretty solid. So this one I don't expect to be any different. You know, this is definitely something that I would like to see if I'm in white. And it has all the things I'm looking for in limited. The life gain's relevant, the power and toughness is relevant, the flying is super relevant, and I don't have any complaints about this card. No constructed playability, but this isn't a constructed card. Next up, we have Lifecraft Calvary. So this is a 4/4/5 with trample, and its revolt is that it simply enters with 2 +1 counters. So this is potentially a 6/6 trampler for 5. Well, that's pretty decent for a common. This is one of those cards that's going to be a curve topper, not something you want to see a lot of, but if you do have the ability to trigger revolt reliably, a 6/6 trampler for 5 is pretty good. A 4/4 for 5 is not the worst, because 4 is a good toughness to have. It's going to be able to block a lot and still be an aggressive creature for you if need be. But really this is going to shine if you can reliably make it to 6/6. Again, you know, there's nothing super special about this card. It's just simply a big creature, and that's what green likes to see. Next up, we have Bastion Inventor. So now this is another 4/4 creature, but this time it's for 5 and a blue, and it has hexproof, and it has improvise. So now a 4/4 for 6 is pretty mediocre, but the fact that this guy can become potentially much cheaper in the right artifact deck makes him a lot more interesting. Again, this is a big creature that's in there to be a big creature and nothing more, and it's only going to be used if it's needed in those, you know, situations in your limited decks. The hexproof is kind of good, kind of irrelevant, but the ability to potentially improvise this guy out for, you know, as low as 1 blue in an ideal situation. You know, if you get him out for 3 and a blue or less, I would say at that point he's pretty good. But he does require that additional setup with artifacts and stuff to be able to really be that relevant. Next up, we have Lifecrafter's Gift. So this is an uncommon instant, and it puts a +1 counter on a creature, then a +1 counter on each creature you control that already has a counter on it. So now this is a really, really solid card in the right deck. To instant speed, suddenly buff up your entire team. If you're in the, you know, the deck that's already using +1 counters, it's pretty absurd. And I can see this being one of those combat tricks or, you know, surprise finishers That's just going to blow people out. You know, this is going to completely change combats and things like that. Now, on its own, if you don't have the +1 counter deck, this is not that good, because for 4 mana you get 2 +1/+1 counters. That's not the worst thing ever. You know, there have been worse buff spells, but you know, that's not something that I want to be doing. This is made for that specific deck that we've already seen in Kaladesh Limited, which is going to carry over with so many +1 counter shenanigans. And if you fit it in here and you get a couple of these, that is going to be a beautiful deck to behold. Next up we have Dispersion Technician, if it loads here. So this is a 3/2 for 5, and his ability is simply when he enters the battlefield, you can return an artifact to its owner's hand. A 3/2 for 5 is extremely overcosted, and he does give you options. You can bounce one of your own artifacts to replay it. You know, you can get rid of one of your opponent's artifacts, but there's so many artifacts that have good ETBs. I think it's more so something to use for yourself, and that's just too overcosted. This guy's not good to be a curve topper, so I actually don't see this guy being that good even in limited. He just seems a little too bad, unfortunately. Maybe I'm you know, undervaluing, but I just don't see him having much playability even in the lowest of low limited decks. Next up, we have another uncommon. This is Maulfist Revolutionary. That's a 3/3 trampler. Dang, green has a lot of trample now for some reason. For 1 and 2 green, and whatever enters the battlefield or dies, for each kind of counter on permanent or player, you can give that permanent or player another kind. So whenever she enters the battlefield, you can give yourself energy, or you can also put the counters on. You know, this has a lot of different implications. If you're in the deck, this is going to go in multiple decks, because if you're in the deck for energy, you'll get energy. If you're in the deck for counters, you get counters. And if you have both those crossed together, you know, you got some thriving rhinos going on, then it's going to do whatever you want whenever you want it. At 3/3 for 3 is already aggressively costed. It is going to trade with a lot of the 2-drops and 3-drops in the set, but the trample is going to get you through any of those pesky servos and thopters. And, you know, again, getting those extra counters is just what we like to see, and we will continue to see cards like this played. You know, I think this is semi-high pick in a draft, and this is something you're definitely going to be playing if you have it in your seal pool. If you're in green, of course. Next up, we've got Hinterland Drake. So now this is a 2/3 for 3, and flyer, of course, and then it can't block artifact creatures. Has this one been reprinted? Doesn't look like it. So now this is a slightly better Windrake, but worse. If you're in a super offensive blue deck, this is obviously better than Windrake because of the 2/3, and it actually trades into Windrake, which is interesting. But if you're on the defensive side of a deck, you know, it's much, much worse. There's not a lot to say about this. You know, it's simply a flying card. It's going to fit in your curve if you need it. Flying is still going to be good, so it is what it is. Next up, we have Alley Evasion. So now this is an instant for 1 white, and it has 2 different abilities. You can either give a creature +1/+2 until end of turn, or you can return a creature you control to its owner's hand. Excuse me. So now this card actually seems pretty interesting. This has, again, it's one of those kind of modular cards that's going to have a couple different uses. If you need it for the kind of mediocre combat trick of 1/2, you got it. But the better ability is going to be, you know, to do an attack, you know, based on your opponent's blockers. You're going to save one of your creatures, and you get to reuse its ETB and things like that. And considering it does only cost 1, I think this is pretty decent. It also goes in the black-white value deck. For sure, you know, bounce one of your Weaponcraft enthusiasts and get 2 more servos, things like that. So I think this is a pretty solid combat trick. With Aether Revolt being added to Kaladesh, we're going to see a lot more combat tricks. You know, I don't know what the right number to play in decks is going to be now, but we're definitely going to see more variety in what those tricks are. Next up, we have Monstrous Onslaught. So now this is a sorcery for 3 and 2 green, and it simply deals X damage, divided as you choose, to any number of target creatures. And X is the greatest power among creatures that you control. So if you have a 5/5, then you can deal X damage to, you know, however you want to creatures. It's kind of weird because it's kind of a green burn spell, which is a little odd. And that's good If you have the big deck where, you know, you're going to have a 6/6 or something out, I mean, this is potentially a board wide. But it is high costed at 3 and 2 green and requires you to have something and requires that something to be something that's also big. So it's kind of narrow when this card is going to be good. I can see it being a blowout in very situational situations, but I don't think it's going to be something that's going to be a, you know, a sought after card or anything like that. No constructed playability. Now, I will say, if you can get this on a Death Touch creature, you know, even if it was like a 3-drop with Death Touch or something, that would be pretty cool, because then you can just, you know, pop, 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 ping them off. That'd be pretty interesting. Oh, no, let me rephrase that. I just now said that wrong. Monstrous Onslaught deals the damage, so actually that doesn't work at all. My mistake on misreading that. So, yeah, it's just, it's a Monstrous Onslaught, but it's not looking that monstrous. Next up, we've got Ice Over, because we had Malfunction, so why not make a better Malfunction in the same block? Because why not? So Malfunction was a 4-drop that was a little awkward to play, but was good, and this is a 2-drop that does the exact same thing, and it can hit any artifacts, not just vehicles. I mean, it's kind of weird that they print this card right after printing Malfunction, but this is good. This is a solid blue, quote-unquote, removal spell. It can lock down your opponent's artifact, you know, as far as just traditional artifacts that are providing, you know, card advantage or whatever it may be, or your any creature, and just keep it tapped down for the rest of the game, potentially. Pretty solid card, you know, for at the aggressively costed 1 and a blue. I don't have any complaints on this. If I'm in blue, I'm probably going to play every one of these I can get, and I'm also, this is going to be a high draft pick card, too. Next up is Illusionist Stratagem. This is an instant for 3 and a blue, and you exile up to 2 target creatures you control, and then return them. So you blink 2 creatures and draw a card. This is one of those that's going to go in certain decks and be absolutely awesome, and in other decks it's going to just be meh. So if you have the super value deck where you want to be bouncing and replaying and blinking and everything, it's just going to be crazy, because you can just do beautiful things. And the fact that it does let you cantrip and draw that card is pretty relevant too, because you're probably going to get some type of value in the right deck off of those blinks, and to just replace the card itself seems pretty good. 4 is a little awkward, you know, that requires you to leave a lot of mana open to do this, but I can see this definitely causing some blowout situations, you know, in the right deck, in the right situations. Next up, we have Ronin Renegade. This is a 1-drop. A 1/2 for a green with Death Touch, and its Revolt triggers that it gets a +1 counter. So a 1/2 Death Touch for a green is not bad. I mean, it, you know, doesn't die to the Thopters and Servos, and it can potentially kill something big. You know, it's relevant. And then if it comes in as a 2/3 for 1, well, that's really good then. I mean, that's super aggressive. The Death Touch ability is still there, being relevant, so I like this card. It's better in Revolt, but playable as is. You know, there's not a super lot of 1-drops in the Aether Revolt Limited, so this is a welcome addition, and looks really good. You know, it's something green wants to see. It's not going to be a super high pick card unless you're in green, and then it's going to be something you definitely want to be grabbing. Next up, we've got Audacious Infiltrator. This is a 3/1 for 2 that can't be blocked by artifact creatures. So normally I would say a 3/1 is pretty bad, but having that semi-unblockability in this set is pretty good. Any type of evasion like that is decent. I mean, again, this is a curve filler. You know, it's nothing special. There's nothing amazing about it. It's a dwarf. It's cool. But in the right situations, you know, it is going to be potentially unblockable. And for that reason alone, you know, it's a little higher value than others. But again, it's a 2-drop. It's an aggressive creature. Play it if you're playing that deck. Next up, we've got an instant in blue. This is 3 and a blue for Leave in the Dust. You return a non-land permanent to its owner's hand and draw a card. So essentially, this is Disperse, but for 2 extra mana, you're drawing a card, so It's a little expensive. You know, you can get your own stuff and get your opponent's stuff. It's not the worst thing ever, but with already so many other good combat tricks and just better blue cards that you can do, I don't think this is going to be that good of a card. It's there if you have to play it, but it's not something that is necessarily good by any means. Next up, we've got Natural Obsolescence. This is an instant for 1 of the green, and you put an artifact on the bottom of its owner's library. This is a straight trade, 1 for 1, and seems pretty solid. There's so many artifacts. This is definitely main deckable in the Aether Revolt Limited. There's always going to be something to hit. Obviously, worst case scenarios, you hit a servo. Best case scenario is you hit their Gear Hulk or something, and it's out of the way permanently, but essentially. I like the card, and depending on if Standard actually has really, a significant amount of artifacts that maybe don't want to be in the grave, I can see this potentially even being used in constructed formats. Maybe even be used in like EDH or something just for the ability to, get something out of the way permanently like that. But as far as Kaladesh Limited goes, I think this is a pretty good card. Not going to high pick it, it's kind of like Appetite. It's just one that you definitely want to get a couple of, but, you'll get them when they come around to you. Next up, we've got a classic here in Negate. We all know what this is. It's to counter a non-creature spell. It's already in Standard, so nothing to say there. As far as Limited, it's decent. Counter spells, again, are not that strong in Limited, and there's a lot more creatures than spells, usually. So this is obviously going to be a sideboard card, pretty much only, and it'll be used when it's necessary. It's Negate. That's pretty much it. Next up, we have Bastion Enforcer. He's a good old vanilla 3-2 for 3. 3-2 is not that good in this format because there's so many 3-2s for 2. He's a little overcosted in that regard. He's a dwarf, so it's whatever. But overall, there's nothing special about this guy. He's a little overcosted, I think, so probably one of the weaker, curve fillers there. Next up, we've got Salvagescutler. So this is a 4-4 for 5 on one of those big blue creatures. And whenever it attacks, you return an artifact you control to its owner's hand. So now it's cool that this doesn't have the limitation of requiring an artifact to be returned to your hand. It just does it, if you have an artifact gets returned. If not, you can still attack with it and everything, so that's no problem. And this does allow you to replay those artifacts to get those multiple ETBs. Maybe you get this with the Prophetic Prism and you're drawing an extra card for 2 each turn. Definitely some cool things like that you can set up. So I don't have any complaints about this guy. He seems decent as a, big blue filler. Maybe there'll be some combo with him where, you can return an artifact to do something with him. I'm not sure about that, but overall, he seems decent. Nothing special. He's just a big crab, and he's better than the last big crab we have, too. Next up, we have Pima Aetherseer. So this is an elf druid for 3-2 for 3 and a green. So it's a little overcosted for its power toughness, but whenever it enters the battlefield, you get energy equal to the greatest power of non-creatures you control. So if you just play it alone, you're going to get 3 energy, which is pretty good. Then you can pay 3 energy and make a creature block this turn. So I actually really like this card. It's one of those that has that greatest power among creatures you control, but it doesn't require anything else to be good. It's fine on its own in that it'll at least give you 3 energy. And then if you have something bigger, well, it's going to give you a ton of energy then. So this is a really solid card. I can see this having some constructed playability potentially too. It's a little high costed for that, so it may not, but I see it as a possibility again. In Limited, I think this card is definitely fine. It's a great 4-drop. The 4-drop slot can get clogged sometimes, but I think that the amount of energy this is going to give you is definitely going to be relevant. And the ability to make something block is not something I don't think have seen at all in Kaladesh, so that's a good ability to have. Overall, a really solid uncommon in green, and no reason not to play it if you got it. Next up, we have Prey Upon, another reprint here. So this is just simply that good old 2 creatures fight. It's always been pretty decent in green. You grab a Death Touch guy and trade off with their biggest thing. And we have quite a few Death Touch targets to do that with. If you've got big creatures, you kill off one of their smaller ones. You do some combat tricks after, main phase 2 after combat's been resolved. A lot of different uses for Prey Upon. It's a really solid card. It's a semi-high pick in draft. And again, if you're in green, you're probably going to play this card. Next up, we have Shielded Aether Thief. This is a 0-4 for 1 of the blue with Flash, which we haven't seen any. Maybe one other in Aether Revolt? I can't remember. And whenever he blocks, rather, you get an energy, and you can tap and pay 3 energy to draw a card. So, you know, this guy's just the big quote-unquote wall of the set, even though he doesn't have Defender, which he should have Defender in my opinion, but that's beside the point. And he's just pretty cool. You know, whenever he blocks, he gains an energy. I think that's a unique mechanic to him. And the ability to just, you know, draw those cards if you have reliable energy producing is really awesome. You know, maybe get this in an Aether Squall and just have, you know, guaranteed draw a card extra for free each turn. Seems pretty good. And he does have that magical toughness of 4, so that means there's a lot of stuff he can block. And there's so many 2-drops if you're on the play or draw. Either way, this guy's going to be good, because if you drop him going first, then you'll beat the opponent's 2-drop that's going to be a 3-2. And if you're going second, then you'll match it and still be able to block it. So overall, again, I don't have any complaints about this guy. He seems really, really good, actually. And I'll imagine this guy will see quite a bit of play. Maybe even constructed play or something like that if there's some type of defensive energy deck we see. Next up, we have Ridge Scale Tusker. This is another big green uncommon. This is a 5/5 for 3 and 2 green. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you put a +1 counter on each other creature you control. This guy seems pretty solid. You know, 5/5 for 5 is already decent and limited. And the ability to just put a counter on every other thing you have, that seems really good. Kaladesh Limited, at least, had quite a few, you know, somewhat clogged boards, 3 or 4 creatures. And this card can just, you know, turn the tide of a battle like that. You know, if you have the ability to just play this, suddenly all your creatures are just so much more relevant. And that's going to allow you to push through a lot of victories. And getting out a big, beefy body in himself is always good. No complaints about this guy. If you're in green, you're probably going to play him. The 5-drop in green is a little clogged because there's a lot of good 5-drops out there. So it's really just going to depend upon what you have, you know. But overall, I like this guy a lot. Solid card, and he'll see a lot of limited play. Next up, we have Caught in the Brights, one of the cooler flavor cards. So now this is an enchantment aura for 2 and a white, the pacifism of the set. So now this is enchanted creature can attack or block, of course. And whenever a vehicle you control attacks, you can exile the enchanted creature. So it's a little overcosted for a pacifism effect in that it's 2 and a white, but if you have the vehicle deck, then that allows you to go ahead and permanently remove that creature to eliminate the possibility of them, you know, getting rid of your aura or something like that. I feel like the vehicle aspect is more of just a kind of a cool little flavor plus. It's not necessary for the card to be played, but, you know, it definitely makes it better. You know, Revoke Privileges is already a much better white card at 2 and a white, and you're definitely going to play that over this card if you have it. But if for some reason you're needing that semi-removal in white, and especially if you have a couple vehicles, it seems like a decent little limited card. Next up, we have Take Into Custody. This is a 1 blue instant to tap creature, and it doesn't untap. So it's a nice little frost effect. It's extremely cheap and just 1 blue. And it's a decent combat trick. It's, you know, a lot of different things that you can do with this. Overall, I like it quite a bit. I think it's going to have some playability. I don't think it's a high-pick card. I don't think it's a super powerful card. But little frost effects can be really relevant. And it's too bad this doesn't let you draw a card or something. Then it would be really good. But as is, I don't have any big complaints. It just does its role of being that little blue drop that's a little bit of a nuisance. Next up, we've got Scrounging Band. This is a 0/0 for 1 of the green, but it enters the battlefield with 2 counters. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can remove any of the counters from it and move it on to another creature. So at worst, you have a bear that can do more, so that's already decent. And if you have the ability to be reliably putting counters on this, this allows you to move those counters around in, you know, various ways, and it just seems like it's going to give you a lot of options as far as that goes. And options are always good in any, you know, game of Magic. It's also a cat monkey. And if that isn't enough reason to love it, I don't know what is. It's a freaking cat monkey. That makes like the second one, third one maybe. So, you know, definitely no complaints here. He's decent as a 2-drop, and he just gives you those options to do better things later on. So Scrounging Mandar definitely sees some play. Next up, we have Windcan Raiders. This is a 4/3 flying for 6, but it has Improvise. A 4/3 for 6 is definitely overcosted, but again, if you've got the artifacts to make this guy cheap, it could be pretty cool. I would say that if you drop this for 4 or less, at that point it would be pretty solid. Anything above that's going to be not really worth it. Again, it requires the kind of setup deck to make it really good. So this is one of those cards that's going to be a little, well, it's going to be really dependent upon your deck. If you can reliably have a bunch of artifacts to improvise it with, its value definitely goes up from there. And flying is, again, relevant in this set. Next up, we have Conviction. This is another aura from the set, and it is a 1 and a white to give a creature +1/+3. But you have the ability to pay a white and return Conviction itself to its owner's hand. So this is a little better than a traditional aura in that you do have the option to save it. You know, if the creature dies, you can just return Conviction to its hand. But overall, that would normally be pretty irrelevant in most sets. But what's cool about this is this does allow you to trigger Revolt. That's what this card does cool. So for just 1 white, you can get your Revolt trigger for the turn, and potentially, you know, move this on to better options. And again, this is one of those cards that gives you a lot of choices in how you play it. Do you want to just save it because your creature's dying? Do you want to trigger Revolt? Do you want to move it to something else? It's a lot of options for an aura, so I definitely think this is one of the better auras, you know, as far as just little common auras that we see. 1/3 is somewhat irrelevant, but again, you know, this is going to be in the Revolt deck if you need it for Revolt, and that's its primary focus and what it'll be used for. Next up, we have Unbridled Growth. So this is a green enchantment aura again, and it chance a land to add 1 mana of any color, and you can also sacrifice the growth to draw a card. So this is a pretty solid card, because first of all, a lot of times these mana filtering auras cost more than 1. So considering this is just a 1 green, that's pretty solid. And it allows you to get a lot of color fixing. What else is cool is that once you have your colors fixed, and are no longer needing that, you can just sack it off to replace itself. So I definitely see this being pretty solid if you're in a 3-color deck using green. And even in a 2-color deck, it's going to have its uses, because at worst, it is 1 green draw a card, you know, to filter through your deck a little more, and that's not the worst thing we've ever seen. So I definitely see this having some uses, and it'll really, really help some 3-color decks out. Next up, we've got Dawn Feather Eagle. This is a 3/3 for 5 with flying. Whenever it enters the battlefield, all your creatures get +1/+1 and vigilance until end of turn. So now a 3/3 for 5, even flying, is a little undercosted, but the ability to just give yourself that big buff is pretty decent. You know, it is sorcery speed, so it loses a lot of overall value like that. But, you know, this is not a card that I have any big complaints about. You know, it's a curve topper for that final push through, and it does give you vigilance, so, you know, you'll still be able to get that block. And it kind of just does really good at what it's intended to do. It's just a typical common finishing flying creature, so, you know, not a lot to say. It fills its role, and it does it well. Next up, we have Alley Strangler. This is 2/3 Menace for 3. So now 2/3 is going to trade with a lot of the 2-drops in the set, a lot of the 3-drops in the set, so it's nothing on the defensive side. 2/3 Menace is not super relevant. If it was a 3/2 Menace, I would say it would be better. But as is, you know, this is a curve filler. It's an Aetherborn, so maybe that's relevant. And Menace is always pretty good. I don't think Menace is as good in this set as it has been in some others, but overall, I don't have anything super negative to say. This is kind of just an average, mediocre card. It's not good, but it's not awful either. Next up, we have Deadeye Harpooner. I like the name. This is a 2/2 for 3, and its revolt trigger is that it can destroy target tapped creature. So now this seems pretty solid. A 2/2 for 3 is nothing to write home about, but the potential to just kill something, anything that's tapped, that seems pretty strong. Especially, you know, maybe you, you know, use, what's the card from Kaladesh where it pay 2, tap, and draw a card? Can't think of the name of it, but anyway, there's a lot of options for how you can just get something tapped, and then just to plop this guy down and kill it. That's pretty relevant, and you're gonna have a little body there. It's a dwarf, which is cool. This card is just a good card. Removal's always good and limited. Whenever you get a body with it, it's even better. And it is a little specific in that it has to be a tapped creature, but otherwise it would be absurd. So definitely a strong card here. This will see a lot of play when you get it. Let's see. Next up we have Cruel Finality. So this is an instant for 2 and a black. Gives a creature -2/-2, and you scry 1. So again, removal in any limited format is always good. So now this is a little expensive in that it is a 3 for just a -2/-2. I mean, we've seen things like Deadweight for 1 black, and is it really worth it to get, you know, instant speed and a scry 1 for 2 more? I'm not sure, but this is a combat trick that can also be a kill spell and gives you a scry, so this definitely has some high playability. The 3-drop slot is a little clogged in black, so it's a little awkward in that regard, but I don't see any reason not to play this. Wish it was like -1/-3, and then it would be so much better as a kill spell, but overall it just is what it is, and there's nothing to say about it. Play it if you're in black, if you need that kill spell potential. Next up we have Daring Demolition. This is 2 and 2 black for a sorcery, and destroys target creature or vehicle. So this is pretty straightforward. You know, it's a 4-drop removal spell at sorcery speed. Pretty mediocre in that regards. It's kind of cool that it can hit vehicles, but it doesn't convince me by any means. I don't really want to be paying 4 for a sorcery speed removal spell, so I have to say this is one of the bad cards in the set. It's there if you desperately need removal, but otherwise, I don't think you really want to be playing this card. Maybe sideboard it in if your opponent has a ton of really good vehicles or something, but that's about it. Next up we have Defuse Dismissal. This is an instant for 3 and a white. It deals 3 damage, divided as you choose among 1, 2, or 3 attacking or blocking creatures. So this essentially is deal 3 damage however you want to anything in combat. Those abilities are already pretty decent. You know, Impeccable Timing is already a pretty decent card. But as a 4-drop, that makes it a little more awkward. I mean, you may pick off 3 tokens with it, which would be good. You know, maybe pick off a token and, you know, 3/2 creature or something. The card has playability, but I don't think it's good necessarily. It just is what it is. Again, you know, it's just one of those cards that you're going to play if you're desperate for removal or combat tricks in white. But it's not something that's going to make me want to play white just by having it by any means. Next up, we have Defiance Salvager. This is a 2/2 for 2 and a black. It's an Aetherborn, and it has to sacrifice an artifact or creature, and you put a +1 counter on it, but you can only do it at sorcery speed. So now the sorcery speed is what really makes this guy irrelevant. If it was instant speed, that would be pretty cool. You know, push through, make it unblockable or something, and just sack your field to win. But can't do that with this guy. He is a free sack outlet, you know, which is sometimes relevant. You know, he allows you to get that free trigger of Revolt and things like that. And he does do the +1/+1 counter thing that black has a little sub thing going on. You know, maybe in the black-green deck, this guy's a little better. But overall, he's under cost. You know, he's under power toughness for his cost, and it's not a very, you know, this is not a very good card at first glance. Next up, we have Felidar Guardian. Oh yes, the card that made Saheeli jump up $20 in price. So in Constructed, this guy's pretty interesting because he's a 1/4 for 4, and whenever he enters the battlefield, you can exile another permanent. That means Planeswalker, land, whatever, and you blink it. So the reason this goes infinite with Saheeli, of course, is because Saheeli is a -2 to create a copy of a creature. Whenever you make a copy of Felidar, it re-triggers. You exile Saheeli, she enters as a new, you know, enters again, so she's a new thing. So you can use her loyalty ability again, and it just goes infinite with you making infinite 1/4s. In Limited, if you have both cards and you want to play a red, white, blue deck, that'd be hilarious, and I'd say go for it. But a 1/4 is not that good. 4 is a good number, but the 4-drop is already clogged with a lot better cards. So this is really going to be dependent on if you have the targets to blink. Like this in black-white value is going to be a really good card. But in, you know, white-blue, you know, or something like that, you're probably not going to use it as much. You know, it's not a bad card. You know, it can be a filler if need be, but this is only going to be a good card when you can abuse that blink ability. Next up, we have Ghirapur Osprey. This is just a Windrake, except it's white. It's a 2/2 flyer for 3. Pretty solid. It's flying, and it's a 3-drop, and you'll probably play it. End of story. Next up, we have Restoration Specialist. This is a 2/1 for 2, and it has pay a white, sack it, return up to 1 artifact, and up to 1 enchantment from your graved hand. So a 2/1 for 2 is average at best. Yeah, it is an Artificer, it's a Dwarf, both those things can be relevant. But the ability is essentially in the right deck to pay a white and draw 2 cards to get any artifact, vehicle and equipment and whatever. And then you also get an enchantment back too. So this card seems pretty decent if you have both those things in your deck. If you've got a couple revoked privileges and maybe a couple vehicles or something, this guy definitely goes up in value. And he's already a 2/1 for 2, so there's no reason not to play him as is. But he goes from a decent card to a good card if you can really get that ability to go off. Or if you have the Dwarf or Artificer deck, of course, his value goes up there too. Next up, we have Thopter Arrest. So this is an enchantment for 2 and a white. And whenever it enters the battlefield, you exile an artifact or creature until it leaves. So this is the worst O-ring of the set. And it only hits artifacts and creatures, so it's really limited in that regard. It's one of those cards that it does what it does in limited. It's nice to be able to just remove whatever you want. It's unfortunate this only hits artifacts and creatures because that limits it from other enchantments and things like that. But it is what it is. This is that removal spell when you need it, and it's a playable card. I'm not going to say it's solid because I think there are better versions of this card, and that is what it is. We'll see a lot of playability for this. There's no reason not to play it for that matter in Kaladesh Limited. Next up, we have Chandras Revolution. So now this is an sorcery for 3 and a red. It deals 4 damage to a creature, and then you also just tap a land and it doesn't untap. So now red always seems to get 1 or 2 cards in the set that randomly are a 4-drop that have some type of mana disruption or land destruction or something, and this is just that card. Tapping a land and it doesn't untap is pretty meh. I mean, it can kind of disrupt your opponent one time. If this was an instant, it would definitely be better. 4 damage to only your creature really hurts it too. So overall, I'm not impressed with this card. There's so much better removal in red already. This is not something that I want to be playing, but it's something that I may play if I just desperately need that red burn spell and don't have any other options. Moving on, we have Destructive Tampering. This is 2 and a red for a sorcery, and it destroys an artifact, or it can make all creatures that don't have flying. They can't block this turn. Well, it's already better than Demolish because it can hit an artifact, and the land part of Demolish is already pretty irrelevant. And then to have that additional option to just potentially, make the opponent not be able to block, if they don't have the, board state for that or something, is pretty solid. Usually those abilities are kind of bad, but considering this is already a removal spell potentially, it's pretty good. This gives you those options, and there's a lot of cards in Aether Revolt that give you options, and that's always a good thing. So this guy, I think, is good. I don't have any complaints about him. It's just there to be a removal. It's there to potentially push through, and it'll serve those 2 purposes as need be. Next up, we've got Embrawl Gear Smasher. This is a 2/3 for 2 and red. And its ability is tap, sack an artifact, and then this guy deals 2 to each opponent. He's obviously better in 2-headed Giant. In 2-headed Giant, I'd say this guy's actually pretty decent because it's 4 damage a turn. But as is, he's not bad. He can tap and sack an artifact to trigger Revolt. 2 damage each turn if you have the ability to do that. It's relevant. But he's a 2/3 for 3, which is a little overcosted. And it's nothing to write home about. There's nothing super special about this. It sets up Revolt, it deals damage, and it's going to serve those 2 roles and be a curve filler if you need it to be. And that's about it. We've got Enraged Giant. This is a 4/4 for 6 with Trample and Haste, and it has Improvise. So now this is one of the better kind of big beefy improvised creatures that we've seen just because of the haste aspect, I feel. A 4/4 for 6 is bad. A 4/4 for 5 is bad. A 4/4 trample and haste for 4, pretty solid. And anything under that is just straight value. So I like this card a lot. He does require the improvised deck to be there. You're going to have quite a few artifacts to make him good. But you can use this guy as a curve topper and then potentially drop him earlier, and that's where I think he'll be good. So I think this one is decent. It's definitely playable, and I'll probably see it in a few decks here and there. Next up, we have Frontline Rebel. So now this is a 3/3 for 3, but he has to attack each combat. 3 toughness is not that relevant, so this card is not that good. He'll be a curve filler when need be, but as a 3/3, that's just whatever. I mean, if he was a 3/4, I mean, I think it'd be good, but there's just so many things that already have 3 power, and to have to attack, it's just such a drawback. He doesn't really offer you anything to justify that drawback. So, overall, this is a bad card, I feel, and I don't want to play this unless I absolutely have to. So, looks like we've got a little more to go here, but we've already been going for about 45 minutes. So I think I'll go ahead and split this into 2 different videos since there were so many spoilers here, and we'll do a little shorter one coming up next time I do this. So overall, you know, again, Aether Revolt is looking like a super fun limited environment, and today's, you know, video may have not been as interesting because it's mostly, you know, the filler cards and things like that, but it's always good to have an idea of what is out there. So, you know, I hope to see you guys at the pre-releases. Those are coming up this weekend, and I'm pretty excited for it. I'm really back into Magic right now, and Aether Revolt is just helping that right along here. So as far as the stream goes, any feedback is appreciated. I do like likes, I do like follows, and I super appreciate shares and subscriptions. I try to make my videos a little interesting, try to make them fun for you guys. Hopefully we'll get some more chat interaction in here again one day. But for right now, I do thank you guys for tuning in. And as always, this is The Bearded Fool, and I am signing off. I will catch you guys next time.